Is your weightlifting your weakest link when it comes to CrossFit? Well, in this video, I'm going to be taking you 3 key technical lessons that you can learn from the women that competed at this year's CrossFit Games. I have no doubt that these lessons are going to lead to you crushing some new PBs, but before we get into that, let's talk weightlifting and CrossFit. There's no doubt that weightlifting has become extremely popular thanks to CrossFit, and it's events like this one that we're going to be reviewing today from the CrossFit Games that has made it that way. I personally absolutely love the way that CrossFit has actually made the viewership of Olympic weightlifting in the style that they've done the competition. What I mean by that is if you look at old dated Olympic weightlifting competitions, or even the way that they're still ran now, it is essentially one person comes out, lifts, goes back behind the corner, and then the next person comes out and lifts. It makes it very difficult for you to get a sense of the personality of the lifter that's coming out, but equally for you to get any kind of indication of how the Olympic weightlifting competition is going or what's happening in their warm-up. Now, this new style of CrossFit competition where everyone's out in the field at the same time and it's going minute to minute lift means that there's absolutely non-stop action, which makes it extremely exciting to watch. Now that weightlifting has become such a huge part of CrossFit from a competitive standpoint, you're seeing more and more of the top athletes now dedicate time specifically to Olympic weightlifting. You look at the likes of Tia-Clair Toomey, Sarah Sigmund's daughter, or even Matt Fraser. All of these athletes have competed at extremely high levels of Olympic weightlifting, which stands them in such good stead for CrossFit competitions. I'm fortunate to work with some of the best CrossFit athletes in the world, and I can tell you from experience that they're doing 5 Olympic weightlifting sessions a week. Because not only does it mean that they're going to get better at the Olympic lifts that they have to compete in, they're going to build a great foundation of strength and explosive power. And this is one of the key things that people neglect or forget about with Olympic weightlifting. It's not just a sport that you compete in. Weightlifting is a great form of training to build that strength and explosive power that can be used across many, many sports. So what we're going to be doing in this video now is taking a look at some of the techniques of the top female athletes at this year's CrossFit Games to learn some lessons about their technique and how we can see improvements being made to yours too. If you stick with me for this video and you put into practice the lessons that I teach you in this video, you're gonna start smashing some new PBs. So let's get into it. There's a lot of great lifts from this particular event, but one of the things I noticed, particularly from Christine's snatch, is how well she kind of holds discipline in the first phase from the floor. She's got a relatively wide stance, but I don't think it's excessively wide for her frame. I'm not sure how tall she is, but we can see a good relationship, particularly between where her ankles and her knees are. What I would always say as a good guide is that you should be able to make a nice box here between feet and up to the knee. So she's only very slightly outside of kind of where I would say is best practice for where the knees and feet should be in relation to the setup position. You'll probably see as soon as she pulls away, which she does, the knees kind of come closer to that red box line that I drew, but ultimately this means that she's keeping quite good tension in the first phase of the lift. As we come into this second phase, what you'll notice is that there's a slight arm bend that happens through this middle phase. Now, it's super common, and more than anything, as much as we want to try and avoid an early arm bend happening, because if the weight gets too far in the upper body, it can slow down their transition. What you will see even with some of the best athletes in the world is a slight bend at this position. And as long as the bar is in contact with the body when this is happening, it can not be too destructive to the overall lift. She's staying on flat feet really well at this point, and you can also see that the shoulders are directly over the bar. But I'd normally say more than anything, if you see a slight arm bend happening early in the snatch, the other thing you want to try and avoid is the shoulder collapsing forward, which could be argued that's happening a little bit here in her shoulders. So you can see this curvature is kind of happening here. Shoulders might be collapsing forward. So strengthening mid to upper back to hold this position better can be extremely helpful, especially through this middle phase of lift. What I try and think about as I'm punching through here, instead of collapsing, and you can kind of see the peaks on her traps and shoulders here, I think about leading with the chest. Leading with the chest is going to allow you to get that full extension at the top phase of the lift. Whereas I think if we were looking at this from side on, we probably wouldn't see quite full extension with the legs at this point. Regardless, as we come into the receiving position, that bar is staying super close to the body, which is awesome. And then we'll watch the feet. There was a little bit of sloppy foot movement here. One kind of moves out, one doesn't really move, but regardless, she gets into a really nice receiving position there. Nice and deep, great external rotation. Wrists are sat back there at the top, which I love to see. And that's ultimately why she stands nicely out the hole. And she looked really happy with that as well. Nice big smile on her face. Sick. We're going to move on. Let's have a look. So second athlete, we've got a Karine Freyova. This is weird techers in my opinion. Super wide stance. She must have super long legs. She really takes all the load in her back when she lifts from the floor. Her eyes are pointing down and she's just, like I said, utilizing the strength in her back, which can sometimes make it difficult for her to use her legs through the middle phase of lift. But in all honesty, although she's looking forward and I don't like it, she does get her legs coming into play quite well here through the middle phase of lift. So you can see her kind of squeezing the bum at this point and bringing the hips in and striking up, which is good. But one thing that I would suggest is happening here as a result of the way that she initiates the lift at the start is her hands kind of start to pick up. So she's lifting her hands upwards like this, so we can see if we look specifically at her hands here, you see how the back of the hand is pointing up towards the ceiling. Again, I'm not looking at this from the side, but sometimes as a result of this, it can cause the bar to move away from the body. It may not be like super destructive for her, but that's normally what I see when this is happening, okay, into the turnover. It seems to work nicely for her. Weird kind of lockout position on the right hand side. One knuckle stays super stacked here, which we can kind of see. And then the other one sits back further. Not sure why this is. She stands up with her hips first, but we know that her strength's in her hips and her back from the way that she pulled from the floor. And she doesn't move her feet at all. So this is a slightly obscure or different technique than what we would normally see. It is something that I've seen myself and a lot of taller lifters opt for this wide stance and leverage with the back. And she seems to utilize it really well. She's super mobile, so she sits nice and upright with her torso, which is great at this point. Let's look at Laura Horvath. Now, it's interesting because Laura Horvath won this event and she also won the whole of the CrossFit Games. So congratulations, Laura. I've looked at her lifts a lot. She's a great technician in her lifting, full stop. I'm not sure who coaches her, but one thing that you will notice that happens with her feet, okay, watch how her toes flick up. I know the screen's panning as this is happening, but you can see it here. You see how she's kind of going from heel to toe during extension. I try and avoid this because when this happens, naturally what will have happened through the middle phase of the lift is the legs would have got really straight at this point, and now her shoulders are right the way over the bar, which is why we see her kind of pulling it in a little bit in this middle phase of the lift before she strikes up. But nonetheless, she gets nice and tall, keeps the arms hanging loose, which is great. And that's ultimately why we see the bar floating so nicely here through this middle phase as she moves into receiving position. I think that one was very slightly in front, but again, fairly solid lift. Just more than anything, I'd say for her to focus on her balance point in her foot. It's really important when we're snatching, especially if you want to be consistent, to make sure you feel the weight through the flats of the foot the whole way through the lift. If you imagine this like if you were going to do a jump, if you were jumping and you're going from heel to toe, naturally the trajectory or the weight movement's going to be forward. Whereas if you stayed on flat feet to jump vertical, everything's going to be heading much straighter through the middle, which will keep the displacement of the bar much straighter, which I always love to see. Colin Brander's clean and jerk, eyes are up, which is nice. Quite a narrow grip, which is what I also like to see here in the setup. Again, we're seeing toes pointing straight, which is also great. As we progress through the lift, with this dirty arm bend coming in early here, and she pulls the bar into the hip. This is very American, I would say, above anything else. When we're doing a clean, I like to see the bar coming off mid to upper thigh as opposed to out of the hip crease. Because what you'll see is when she strikes here, the bar doesn't continue up much further than where she hits full extension. And this is the trade-off. When you have a bend in your arms or you take a slightly wider grip, you will naturally be able to stand taller and get the bar higher. But I always find that then the overall lift or maximum height on the bar will be less than what it would be if she was striking through mid to upper thigh with loose arms. As a result of that happening, you'll see she loses her grip in her catch position. Not the end of the world, she's keeping the elbows and the hands in line, which is great. And she seems to have a pretty good squat depth in the bottom and catches the bounce standing straight up, which is really good. One thing that I love to see is the fact that as she come up to the top, notice how her foot comes in at this point. It's really important that you bring the foot back in like she's doing here, because else the likelihood of you crossing your feet into the receiving position will increase massively. But what she does really well to negate that is bringing that foot back in after the clean, which is really good to see. If you look at where her feet are moving now in this split jerk, if we draw this line here, you see how she's keeping great width there with the feet. Back foot is flat on the floor, which isn't ideal. This put a lot of pressure on the back, excessive pressure on the back, and can cause you sometimes to drive the bar out in front of the body, which again is less than ideal, but she still recovers really well off her front foot. So it'd say to me that from a balance standpoint, that's quite good, but you can see as a result, the straight leg, you see how her arms press a little bit here in the catch. I think if she softened that back knee, that wouldn't happen, and she'd catch nice and solid there. Now, Karina Freova, again, this is like really unclinical in my opinion, but she's still lifting a solid weight here. As we progress through this lift, you'll notice how she's looking down at the floor. There's loads of energy wasted in this first phase of the lift, which she'll be using that to try and gain momentum. But again, that's going to put so much pressure on her back, which I really would want to avoid in this phase off the floor. But she's obviously brutally strong. I've got an extremely big deadlift because she gets away with it. Into a turnover position, again, sits nice and upright. Feet don't move again into a receiving position, which isn't normal, but works nicely for her. And then into the jerk, you'll see she does have a nice bent back knee, which is good, but she's got this curve happening here in her back. Could be putting, again, a little bit of pressure on the back, but ultimately, really not a bad lift at all. Just unclinical and what we see happening in the first phase of the lift. I wouldn't want her looking down so that she can utilize her legs more, but if her legs aren't super strong, like in a front squat, then she's probably playing to her strengths a little bit in this lift and very heavily using the arms in the pull underneath the bar. Final lift is Laura Horvath's. Now, I reviewed this lift multiple times on Instagram. Discipline in this first phase of the lift is absolutely incredible. She keeps the arms hanging loose. One of the things I love is how well she stays on flat feet through this middle phase. And then you'll see how the bar comes into contact here, mid to upper thigh, and then she lets the bar brush through extension. This is what I was talking about as a technique that I like to see happening, as opposed to what we saw where she is like really bent and firing out of hip crease. We see with Laura Horvath here, she lets the bar brush and keeps the arms hanging loose. This ultimately allows you to be a lot more dynamic in the receiving position. Laura Horvath's lifting a hell of a lot more weight than the other lady here as well. Maybe that's why. In her catch position, the feet move out, which is correct. They do shift a little bit to one side. This is a submaximal lift, so I'm not gonna say too much about that. Other thing that I want you to notice is how Laura maintains a full grip in her receiving position. This will really help with the timing of the catch. She gets the bar off the windpipe when she stands out. I want you to notice this here. As you see her stand up, she gets the bar off the windpipe. This allows her to create a better platform before she goes into the dip and drive of the jerk, which is great. As we go into the jerk, we couldn't really see the feet from this video, but as she goes into the jerk, absolutely lovely position here with the feet. Back knee is bent. That's going to allow her to take the load in the legs. And then if she is slightly out of position, she's also got that range to move within. In terms of her front leg, she's got the weight sitting on the outside edge of this front foot, which is great. This keeps her knee over the foot in the receiving position and allows her to recover from there. Now, she's sunk quite deep. This is a submaximal lift, which is why you'll probably see her recovering off her back foot first. But overall, absolutely incredible. I think that's the biggest lift that they've seen at the CrossFit Games. So I hope you enjoyed this technique review. Like I said, there's lots of great lessons to be learned from the lifts that we saw there. I think more than anything, my takeaway points would be for you to start implementing or paying a little bit more attention to is discipline in the setup position. Making sure that the legs are doing the work through the first phase of the lift. Super important for you to be able to utilize the legs in the second phase of the lift. You would see, even though there's slight differences in technique between the three girls, all of them were making sure that through the middle, they were getting great vertical extension and the bar was staying close to the body. The closer the bar stays to the body, the easier it is to you to move into a receiving position. The other thing I want you to notice about all three of those ladies that we looked at there, great mobility, incredible mobility in the hips and the ankles to find deep receiving positions. If your mobility is good, it allows you to not have to pull the bar as high in order to get into your receiving position. That's why we saw such great consistency for those ladies with the snatch. With regards to the clean and jerk, one thing that you'll consistently see across those three lifts that we reviewed is how well all of them caught the catch of the bounce and stood straight up at the bottom. This is a really important technique to utilize on the clean to save energy for the jerk. If you're catching your cleans and the bar is crashing on you, this is going to take energy out of you to stand out of the squat from a dead position, which can ultimately mean that the jerk's going to be a hell of a lot harder for you. So always in your head, imagine as soon as you receive the clean, stand straight up out the bottom. This is going to really help you with efficiency for the jerk. Final thing that I want you to take away from this video, and if you start implementing this, it's gonna help you make more successful jerks, is to make sure after the clean, you reset yourself for the jerk. Make sure you bring your feet back into shoulder width so that you can aim diagonally in that jerk to create a nice wide base. I always go like this when I do my clean. After I finish the clean and I'm like, no matter how hard it was, I count 3, 2, 1, and when I get to 1, I go again. Taking this time allows me to really reset and make sure I'm keeping a nice controlled dip and drive, but equally creating a platform and bringing my feet in before the jerk. Guys, if you enjoyed this technique review of the ladies from the CrossFit Games, don't forget to go and watch my video that I posted just a week or so ago of the men's CrossFit Games final. It's clear to see that the standard now of Olympic weightlifting is getting higher and higher in CrossFit, and you need to be spending time practicing your Olympic lifts, okay? If you enjoyed this technique review and you want me to do a technique review of you, then please feel free to drop me a message in the comments. I'm gonna put a link to all my coaching where it's delivered through the lifting zone as well, so you can see what I do, and I can of course help you out with your Olympic lifting and get you to the moon as well. Finally, there's also a strength challenge that's happening starting in just a couple of weeks on the lifting zone as well, which is a perfect program to do as a bolt-on to your training if you're looking to build strength and improve your technique heading into next year's season. This is the perfect time now to dedicate time to getting strong before you have to start to build that fitness back before the Open. Guys, big love. Hope you enjoyed that. I'm gonna be back again next week for some more technique reviews. Let me know who you want to see me review next. Big love.